This is out of control.
2019, and finally, we were able to play the Resident Evil 2 Remake. But before we get fully into the review, let's do a little history.
Shit. It's everybody. They've all turned.
The original game was released in 1998 and many consider it the best game in the series, among whom I include myself, of course. To tell the truth, in my particular case it was Resident Evil 2, the game with which I met the survival horror, and even more, I think it is the real father of the genre. Event off everything started with the Resident Evil 1. I believe RE2 was the game where they finished polishing the mechanics of movements, the famous puzzles, the use of the inventory, and many other things. As a matter of fact, all that became evidenced when the remakes of Resident Evil 1 and 0 were launched, showing that those mechanics were still valid several years later, and even now have their remastered versions for all current platforms. But well, as I said before, we are in 2019 and developers had to find new ways to get the experience that the genre demanded. The Resident Evil 7 was a good step in that direction, but we are talking about the Queen's Jewels here, the game that changed everything and could not have the same treatment. So, what can we say about the RE2 Remake? In my opinion, it is undoubtedly an excellent remake. The best to date, period. Is it necessary to play the original of 1998? No. Of course not, although it has winks for those of us who play the classic. It is whole new experience in itself with new mechanics which we will discuss later. But one thing does not take away the other. As I said, it is an excellent remake, but this is also one of its biggest disadvantages, since it could not leave much of a script already pre-established, and that did not let it be able to fly a little further. Although in many opportunities original elements were changed, in my opinion, I think that some details could have been polished and even some situations and events of the original game could have been kept. Let's start talking a little about the game's story. I had already mentioned that as a remake, RE2 is tied to a script already pre-established, and although some defects of the story were fixed, and some minor events were changed, I think a better job could have been done to bring the history to our days. This was an opportunity for the people at Capcom to solve some details of the story that do not seem very logical. For example, we know that the game starts a week after the epidemic in Raccoon City. So why no one contacted the CDC or government? I mean, it's the 90s. There were already telephones, email, TV, radio. Nobody thought of informing what was happening or asking for help. The first thing we see is a trucker listening to a radio show, in which a citizen of Raccoon City literally describes a zombie when the city was already crawling with them, not mentioning that everything was a curse by then. So, did guy lived inside a box? Then we see that this same truck driver runs over an infected person, but the weirdest thing is that it remains in one piece. Evidently being a zombie makes you more resistant, something that I will analyze later. Given the extraordinary ability, they also have to receive several bullets in the skull without problem. On the other hand, when Leon tells us his story, he says that he was ordered not to show at the police station. So, let me see if I understand correctly. The city is a pandemonium and management order his officers not to show up to help and comply with their duties. So much for serve and protect, right? After playing the campaigns of Claire and Leon, we know that both were in the police station at the same time and never crossed paths. It would have been a good opportunity for the changes made in the first campaign to affect the history of the next one. Also, in the original game both characters had radio contact, which would have been a nice touch to maintain. These are just some issues that I think could have been improved. to give a bit more realism to the story, but I am also aware that most players do not pay much attention to those details, and the reality is that it does not affect the general experience of the game. As for the mechanics and gameplay, I have to take off my fedora to the developers, double wink there. As they were facing one of the biggest challenges when making this remake. The times are different now and the players have matured. At the time, the idea of the fixed camera and the transitions when changing scenarios generated in the player uncertainty, since it was unable to see in certain places and could not foresee where the enemies were, which obviously caused a lot of discomfort and some jump scares. These tricks are no longer effective and they had to find a solution so that the player does not feel comfortable loitering around the police station and other scenarios. I think the developers found the answer using 3 factors. The first one is the sensation of claustrophobia. The reality is that there are very few places where we can move at ease or take our time to aim at the head of a zombie. Most are narrow corridors, small rooms or places full of obstacles that prevent us from keeping a prudent distance from our target. And if to this, we add little illumination, not to say complete darkness, then the situation will be quite complicated. Second is the continuous movement of the camera. In this remake, the camera is located over the shoulder of our character, some kind of third person but closer. And although you can expand the range of vision from the options menu, the reality is that it is not a camera that lets us see everything that is around us, and not only that, but depending on where we are or where we enter, that camera automatically zooms in or out. It is almost imperceptible, but it is enough to complicate the aiming or miss an item if you do not pay attention. I think it is also a consequence of the places being too narrow, so that when turning a corner the camera must necessarily zoom in to keep the perspective. Finally, the zombie problem. Historically in Resident Evil, the zombies were that enemy whose main objective was to make us consume as many bullets as possible in order to make our stay difficult, but which did not present a real threat except in large numbers. And remember that we are talking about the classic zombies, the slow ones. Well, nice times those, since that changed a lot. Their zombies move slowly but erratically, and the movement of the camera does not help to aim, so it has become quite difficult to shoot them in the head. I want to clarify that in my particular case I played it on PS4, and it is likely that on PC it is a bit easy to be able to aim with the mouse. It is also worth clarifying that they are no longer confined to a room, but can go out to look for us in different areas, since they can open doors or even throw themselves down the stairs in order to catch us. It is important to remember the places where we leave a zombie walking around or crawling without limbs, because if we go through there again, they will be waiting for us. Personally, what bothered me the most, and maybe it has to do with the famous adaptive difficulty, is that several of them can take up to 5 or 6 bullets to the head, which makes them real black holes of resources. I have also heard some who attribute this behavior to human biology, or zombie, if you will, since apparently our skull is thick enough to withstand the impact of small caliber bullets in some cases, so a simple shot sometimes may not be enough to put a zombie to sleep. And not only that, but also we must destroy the part of the brain that is responsible for the movement, because if we shoot the area that deals with emotions or memories, the zombie will remain active. So, assuming that this is the reason for these hard zombies, I must admit that the developers were really ingenious. And speaking of the adaptive difficulty, surely you have heard the term, as it was the center of some discussions lately, but in case you don't know what it is, well, it is simply a feature that basically what it does is make the game easier if we are struggling or more difficult if we are doing well. This feature is nothing new in the Resident Evil saga, since it has been used since RE4. The thing is that apparently, several players complained that the game is very difficult. Yes, as you heard it, they claimed that the game is too difficult. I do not have much to add to this statement. The game has a difficulty according to what it is, and is fine, but if someone really believes it's too hard, there is always Fortnite, or those kind of games. That being said, this remake offers an assisted mode that literally aims for us in addition to facilitating the enemies, so basically is like watching a movie. In my particular case, the increase in difficulty was noticeable, as in several situations I needed a lot of ammunition to be able to finish with a zombie or licker, but not much more than that. In addition, for those nostalgic who want to play old school, they can play the hardcore mode where you can only save the game using the scare sync ribbons. Another quite popular complaint concerns the infamous Mr. X, since there were people who claimed that the way in which this enemy was introduced ruined their gaming experience. Well, let me tell you that in my case it was improved enormously. He gave another nuance to the game, since I was constantly pending of his footsteps and thinking how to get to a certain room to solve some puzzle. So, beyond the tension generated of being chased at all times, now I can say that I value more the game for those challenges. On the other hand, it is also fair to say that as hours fly by, and as we get used to the mechanics of the game, we will realize that zombies, lickers, or even Mr. X have certain defined areas to move, and they can't access every room. This is something that I personally did not like, because although at the time I could have a bit of peace, I think it draws a bit of tension. At the graphic level, the game is impeccable. The truth is that the re-engine that debuted in the Resident Evil 7 was polished and works great for this remake, which also does not skimp on blood and gore. The number of ways in which we can kill the zombies is morbidly satisfying, whether it's incinerated, dismembered, decapitated, electrocuted and more. I can tell that the game was made with love for the most hardcore fans of the classic, and there is a lot of attention put on the smallest details, such as the light that passes through the bullet holes of some doors, or the way the characters react to the rain and fire, or simply the reactions that they have in certain circumstances.
Now I'm gonna smell like shit, literally.
In conclusion, I can say that RE2 Remake lives up to, and perhaps exceeds its predecessor. The fans of the original are mostly going to be very grateful, and those who are new to the saga will be able to enjoy one of its best exponents. Undoubtedly, I think it will be one of the best games of this year. I cannot wait for the remake of RE3 and Code Veronica to arrive. If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, but most important, always have fun. See you all in the next one.